All right, welcome to the second video right here of section 11.1. So last section you learned about how to look at a normal distribution and identify the likelihood or probability of a value being within a couple standard deviations or certain sections of your normal distribution. Here, we're actually going to look at a problem where you're given some values for the mean and the standard deviation, and you have to answer some questions based on some values that are given to you. So let's look at the problem. The scores for a state's peace officer standards and training test are normally distributed, so that means we have our normal bell curve, with a mean of 55 and a standard deviation of 12. The test scores range from 0 to 100. So here, our first part, we want to find the percentage of people taking the test, and we have a range right here. So before we even get into answering this, let's go ahead and look at what our curve is going to look like. So we know that the scores range from 0 to 100. Let's just go ahead and draw this distribution. So you'll have to apologize. It's a little difficult to draw just with my mouse, so it may not be the prettiest bell curve, but you'll get the idea. So first thing we want to do is we want to identify the mean. So this is our mean right here. Okay, so that's mu. Now, we know the values of our standard deviation. So if we go ahead and let's plot our lines right here. So we know that we have plus 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations and minus 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations. So each of these are plus 1 standard deviation, plus 2 standard deviations, and plus 3. So I'm just going to draw the standard deviation sign. Okay, so plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, and this is minus 1, minus 2, and minus 3. Okay, so right now I'm just drawing the standard deviation sign. Okay, so again, remember this is our mean, minus, and plus each of these values. So what we know right here is that the top of our bell curve is up here. And then it goes down each of these points. Okay, so at each of these it gets smaller and smaller. Okay, and again, when we go to the right, each of these it goes down and gets smaller and smaller. So I'm going to attempt to draw this, and again, it's not going to be the prettiest bell curve, but it gives you the idea. Okay, so this is our bell curve, and we can go ahead and split this up into each of our sections right here. Now, this is what you should be doing when you get a problem like this. You're going to want to split this up and identify the percentage of each. Now, we know that our mean is equal to 55, and we know that our standard deviation is 12. So we can actually go up and calculate these values. So we know that 55 plus 12 is 67, and we know that 55 minus 12 is 43. So we know that our values for one standard deviation are 43 and 67. We can go ahead and take this further and subtract 12 from each of these to get exactly what our values are going to be. So all I'm doing is I'm adding and subtracting 12 by each of these. So we've got 55 as our mean, plus 1 standard deviation is 67, plus 2 standard deviations is 79, plus 3 standard deviations is 91. On the other side, minus 1 standard deviation is 43, minus 2 is 31, minus 3 is 19. So now we can actually look at our problem about what percent of the people taking the test have scores between 43 and 67. So that's actually between this value and this value. That's plus or minus 1 standard deviation. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get back to clicking through the problem, and they're going to have a much nicer and cleaner normal distribution here. But the reason I did this is that I wanted to show you first how you go ahead and draw your own standard deviation when you have a problem and they're not going to have the answers for you. So again, if you have questions on how we got this, you can always rewatch this part and see how this would be drawn. Now, in the problems you do, these values are going to be different. You're going to have a different mean and a different standard deviation, but you go through the same process for drawing these. Now what you're going to do is when you have your normal distribution, you're going to use those percentages that you learned last video, and you're going to apply those to all of these sections that you just split up. Okay, so let's go ahead and click back through these to see how we solve it. So first part, we want to know what percent of the people have test scores between 43 and 67. Well, remember, that's just between the mean -1 and the mean +1. So what we're doing, here's our nice chart drawn out for us. And we know, again, if we go back here, we know that the percentage of having a value that's between plus or minus 1 standard deviation is 68%. So the likelihood, the probability of people having a score between 43 and 67 is just 68% because it's 34 plus 34. That's how easy it is to solve one of those. The key here is setting up your normal distribution. So let's look at the second part. So the agency will only hire applications with test scores of 67 or greater. About what percent of the people have scores that make them eligible to be hired by this agency? So before I click through, let's look at where we're looking on here. So they need to be 67 or greater. So what we're going to need to look at, we identify 67. Okay, and remember, this is +1 standard deviation right now. So they're going to want to have all their scores in this section right here. Okay, so it's going to be +1 or greater. So basically, what we want to know is what is the likelihood of having our value being greater than or equal to our mean plus 1 standard deviation. Okay, so this is what we're trying to find. Having x greater than or equal to the mean plus 1 standard deviation. That's going to give us our whole box right here. So let's go ahead and let's go back and look at our percentages. So we want everything that's greater than this section right here. So all we need to do is add up these percentages. So 13.5 plus 2.35, so that's 15.85% plus 0.15%. Okay, so that's going to give us 15.85 plus 0.15. So that should give us about 16%. Let's go ahead and click through right here. So right here we get 13.5 plus 2.35 plus 0.15, or 16. That's our answer there. So that's how simple it is. It's just, again, finding the locations and the distances away from your mean and just adding them up. So what I want you guys to do right now, here's the problem I want you to look at. So I want you to use the same information that we just had in example 2, and I want you to find the percentage of people taking the test that have scores between 31 and 55. That's part A. Part B, the agency will only hire applicants with test scores of 79 or greater. So what percent have test scores that make them eligible? So basically, what percentage are 79 or greater? And for part A, what percentage are between 31 and 55? So you can go back and look at those percentages that we just had because we're using the same information from example 2. So write these numbers down. go ahead and click back to look at the chart, which is just on the previous page. You can just rewind back to get there, and then fast forward up to the answer box and go ahead and type in your answers. So please split them up by A and B so I know what percentages go with which answer.